Welcome, everybody. And a very big thank you to our great guest speaker this evening, Thea Kurdi. Very proud to say she's a friend and a fellow Mississaugan. Thea, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I'm so looking forward to once again hearing you in a presentation. Take it away, Thea.
Okay, so I have my captioning on. So if you have clicked somewhere away from the blue or the solid bar, the control bar, you should be able to see that captioning appearing at the bottom of your screen. So I have the title slide up. It says Accessibility in the Built Environment and Housing, presented by myself, Thea Kurdi. I'm the Vice President at Designable Environments, and I'm an Accessibility and Universal Design Specialist. So I just wanted to take a quick moment to say thank you so much for taking the time to attend. I am honored that you're interested and appreciate the fact that you're taking time. So if you haven't had a chance yet to mute your microphone, if you could do that. And if my dogs start barking, I will pause and try to mute my microphone so that it doesn't bother you too much. So I have lots to cover today, but I'll start with just a quick introduction for myself. So I've been an accessibility and universal design specialist, and I don't say expert because, you know what, I'm continuously learning. I myself am a person with multiple invisible disabilities, which is why, if you were paying attention at the beginning, I wear a lanyard with sunflowers on it, which is has become an adopted symbol, particularly in the UK and the EU, and we're hoping to see it spread here. For people with to signal customer service that there are potentially invisible disabilities. In my case, one of my invisible disabilities is that I'm hard of hearing. So the fact that we have captioning for presentations like this is a huge asset for people such as myself, and why my new COVID mask, I got a COVID mask from the Como Foundation because it has a window in the mask so that I can lip read. Anyway, I also wanted to let you know that I've been teaching for the last, well, my entire career, which is just coming up on 20 years. Not only do I teach as a part of, presentations like this or going to conferences, but for the first 18 years, I was also teaching during the day school and part-time programs at Sheridan College, which is the school that I graduated from, both in the day school program and post-secondary, which was a ton of fun, and I love to teach. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you. If you're not already following me on social media, you'll notice that I'm on quite a few platforms here. Twitter is where I'm probably the most active, and you can find me at tkurdi there. Or of course, please look me up on LinkedIn, where I have more characters, so I can type longer messages. And my policy is with social media that if a client emails me with a question, I will look up the answer or answer their question. And then if I have some time, I will try to also answer it on social media. So as somebody mentioned, I do post a lot, and I try to make sure that it's really rich content so you guys have good, solid information. And I wanted to announce something special. In fact, you guys are the first people to hear this. If you're following me on social media, you may have noticed a few weeks ago that I announced that something really cool and exciting was about to happen, and I couldn't wait to share what it was. Well, I'm sharing it now. I have been offered the opportunity to do a regular monthly segment with the Dave Brown AMI Now show, and I will be on in the mornings. Details to come. I don't remember the exact time yet. But I will be, my first show will be on Monday, this coming Monday on the 14th. So I hope you'll tune in. AMI does the Dave Brown Now show on both the radio and on TV. So you will see my face, and I will be trying to post pictures so that people can see what it is we're talking about as well. So that's a really exciting new chapter, and I look forward to seeing you there too. Okay, so a little bit about designable environments for those of you who may not know. We're Canada's oldest. We're just celebrating our 33rd anniversary this year, and leading accessibility and universal design consultants. In fact, accessibility is all we do. That's the only thing we do. All of our staff have architectural and now urban planning backgrounds, So it's a built environment focus. I should always emphasize accessibility is far more than just the built environment, but our focus is on trying to create architecture and spaces that are usable for everyone. Our services include a variety of things. Here I've highlighted 4. We do drawing reviews, which means we work with architects to look at new buildings and renovations. We do building audits to assess how accessible existing facilities are. We help to write accessibility standards for every level of government and for large organizations. And we also do research, my also favorite thing, and education. So accessibility really is the only thing that we do so that we can help our clients with the latest, greatest information. So we have several things to cover today, which is ambitious in a half an hour, so we have time for questions, but hopefully you can take some screenshots or take some pictures with your phone or whatever it is to try to capture the things that you'd like to keep for later. So I have 8 things here on the agenda. The first is an introduction to the Accessible Canada Act, what it is and what it isn't. Number 2, understanding Canadian accessibility laws. Number 3, international agreements that Canada has made about accessibility. Number 4, transitioning then into some housing. So because accessible housing is a crisis issue in Canada right now. So I want to make sure you have good, solid information. Number 5 is addressing accessible housing issues. What are they? Things that you may be familiar with, but things that maybe you hadn't heard of yet. And then number 6, if you're ever participating with an accessibility advisory group, how can you give good accessibility feedback? What is useful for architects to hear? Then, of course, I love giving people resources. So particularly because we're going to be in a hurry, please make sure to do a screen grab or take a picture with your phone. And then hopefully we'll still have time for questions at the end. So let's get started with an introduction to the Accessible Canada Act. So Accessible Canada Act, as you may know, was passed last June. And it's an act, which means that there's nothing in it about how to make Canada accessible right away, but it is a framework for how it's going to work. And maybe the most important thing about the act is that it has set a deadline to achieving the Accessible Canada by 2040. So it involves several different aspects. So the Accessible Canada Act, also known as the ACA, deals with these, on the screen here we have different segments that it's going to be trying to address. Remembering that, of course, the Accessible Canada Act sounds like something that's going to impact everything, but really only has the jurisdiction to have authority over federally run institutions and organizations. So it's going to be focusing on service delivery, receiving services that are accessible to all, the built environment, which will allow moving freely around buildings and public spaces, employment or access to employment opportunities, information and communication technologies, availability of accessible information and communication technology, transportation, barrier-free federal transportation network, and procurement, ensuring the purchase of accessible goods and services. So this is the important part. Where does this apply? Because a name like Accessible Canada Act seems to have a very big promise. And we really want to make sure that people aren't over expecting, right? That expectations perhaps are going to be a little bit disappointing for people who don't understand this. So it is about realizing a barrier-free Canada and creating a culture change. There will be standards development to tell us how to do this. And it will try to be proactive with compliance and enforcement measures and monitoring oversights. But, and this is the big but, so if you're taking notes, make sure you have this clear, because I want you to feel confident. That's my whole point today, is make sure you have really solid information so that if you say something, somebody can't tell you, no, that's not true, you'll know that it is. So how does this apply? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's federally regulated institutions, including things like the Parliament. Private sector could be things like banks or the post office, and any, of course, Canadian government institutions or facilities. The exciting part about this is their approach that they're taking. We were talking earlier this evening about the City of London Facility Accessibility Design Standards and how visionary those set of standards were. And you can see here at the bottom of the screen, the nothing about us without us principle in quotes. So the Accessible Canada Act will be implemented in partnership with persons with disabilities and the disability community. One of the biggest problems we have seen in most of our legislation is that we're not talking to people with the lived experience. We're not making sure that things that we're deciding we need to do for accessibility in our legislation actually is accessible or usable. So the hashtag I show at the bottom left corner of the screen here is nothing without us, which is shorter than nothing about us without us, but it is something that you're going to see a lot of people tagging in their social media. So future accessibility standards promised under the Act include 7 different standards, including services, built environment, employment, information and communication, communications, transportation, and procurement. And I've highlighted here in red the built environment, because unfortunately what we learned with in Ontario with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act is that often these things are developed in silos. And if you think about the built environment, obviously there are different parts of these other standards that have built environment impact. So if you think about information and communication policy, there are likely to be things about the built environment that could support or be a barrier to those policy decisions. The same obviously for procurement, communication, transportation, employment, and services. So for example, with the AODA employment standard, there is no built environment requirement for employment. So with the employment standard for the AODA, it requires people to make their hiring practices accessible, but there's nothing in the building code or the AODA about how to make staff areas accessible. So this has again perpetuated some of the barriers that people with disabilities are still facing. We hope to try to alleviate those problems, and I'm going to be doing everything I can to try to make sure that doesn't happen at the federal level. So next on our agenda is trying to understand the Canadian accessibility laws. So in addition to understanding the Accessible Canada Act, we talked about who it applies to. Well, I mentioned Parliament before. Canadian government agencies, including the Canada Revenue Agency, Public Health Agency of Canada, the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, for example, as additional. And then federally regulated public sectors, including bank, telephone, Transportation Canada, and radio and television services, just to name a few. So again, if you were looking for some information and want to do a quick screen grab here, please feel free to do so you have that access to that information. Of course, the Canadian government website includes much more information. So if you need more information, please look that up. I can hear some crinkling. I don't know if somebody could mute their microphone. That would be fantastic. Sorry for my hearing loss. It's a little hard. So there's a couple of different important roles that the Act includes. One is the Accessible Standards Canada group. They're the people who are going to be helping to organize the standards development, and they actually just closed. They had a public call out this summer, and they actually just closed that call, looking for participants to help them with this first standards development, although they are still looking for information online. And if you're following me, anytime I hear something, I will let you know. Although they also do have their own Twitter account and their own Facebook page, so I'm sure you can find great information there too. There's also going to be an accessibility commissioner, as well as the chief accessibility officer, and that person is going to be working with the Minister of Persons with Disabilities very closely. And then the House of Commons has a role as well to pass or approve the standards that are developed. So the roles that are happening here, sorry, hang on. Okay, there goes my dog. Sorry. So nothing about us without us, as I mentioned earlier. there's going to be a board of directors that are part of this standards development, including people with disabilities, it being 51% of that board. And they're going to be including experts in the disability field. So that was a part of their call that they were putting out. They're going to be recommending ways or legal rules to make government-controlled services accessible. And the government's going to decide which recommendations to use, and these will be called regulations. So again, one of the things we are still seeing, because I've been helping with the AODA education standard, which is a new standard being developed here in Ontario, is the Standard Development Committee can put together a series of recommendations, but there is a political aspect. Once the public review goes out, the public can weigh in, but then there is a political part of this before it actually becomes a regulation. So if any of you are familiar with what happened with the built environment standard, in Ontario, we had the accessible built environment standard created as a part of the standards, but it went into the government and 3 years later came out as the design of public spaces. The proposed built environment standard was 260 pages long, but the design of public spaces is only 26 pages long. So you can see that the standards development is an interesting process, but hopefully with a lot of really good organization, we'll be able to get the lessons learned from Ontario through to the federal level. But before that, some 35 years ago now, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms was passed or changed, as well as our Human Rights Code. And both of these laws say really good things that if they were enforced and if our policies had been aligned to them, we probably would be much further ahead. Because both of these things ban discrimination. The Canadian Charter says people with disabilities are equal citizens under the law and shouldn't be discriminated against. The Human Rights Code says, from a built environment perspective, that buildings and spaces shall not discriminate against people with disabilities. And yet, I'm sure everybody here on this call today or participating in this presentation would agree that that's probably not been your experience. So there's a disconnect between the rights that we have under the law here in Canada and many of the policies and continued barriers we face. And this is an important thing. We have a hierarchy to our laws. So most people may be familiar with the local building code, and many provinces use the national building code, which is why I'm showing it here in this chart. And what we see here in this graphic is we have the national building code at the bottom left corner and reference to the Accessible Canada Act in the bottom right corner, which was formerly known as Bill C-81. So just in case you heard about Bill C-81, it's now called the Accessible Canada Act. But above those two is the Human Rights Code. So you are required to make places accessible to the point of undue hardship, meaning that even if the building code doesn't tell you how to do it, and even if the Accessible Canada Act hasn't told you how to do it, or in Ontario, the AODA, it's still your obligation to make sure that you are accessible. So this is where a company like mine might come in to help people try to help define that. So that's a really important point from a liability perspective to understand just because you're following the building code doesn't necessarily mean you have covered your human rights obligations. So let's now quickly look at our international agreements. So first, let's start with the UN, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, also known as CRPD. This is a protocol, or this is a set of standards convention that on Canada and the rest of the world was put forward to the United Nations. And Canada is one of the signatories since 2010. But you may have noticed in the previous slide, there's also mention of something called the optional protocol. And Canada finally signed the optional protocol in December of 2018. So just before the Accessible Canada Act came out, or 6 months beforehand. And the optional protocol is just gives the power for the UN to provide oversight and a place for Canadians to make some complaints if the Canadian government is not meeting their CRPD requirements. We also have, under the United Nations, the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. And what many people in the design industry are very excited about this. Sustainability and green design is something the architecture and design world are very excited about getting on board with. And one of the things I also talk about, one of my other talks, is about the role of disability in the sustainable design guidelines. So that's another tool that you can reference if people are saying, well, why should we have to do this? Well, if you're interested in SDGs, you're interested in accessibility because it's written into many of those goals. And here's an example. I don't know if you guys know Roger Gervais, but here's his Twitter account at Roger P. Gervais. That's Gervais. And Rogers actually launched a complaint under the optional protocol because the federal government has yet to rectify a mistake that we have in our National Building Code, which is part of the reason I want to talk about housing. Did you know that the National Building Code and therefore provincial building codes exempt housing from accessibility? They actually have a clause that says, in most cases, anything other than an apartment building is exempt from accessibility requirements. And then in Ontario, which is probably the most progressive for housing, the apartments, which also includes condos, has a very limited definition of what accessibility requires for that. So I have here Roger's tweet about the case that he has logged, case 76/2020. And I think this was taken just a couple weeks ago. So there were only 20 days remaining at that point. So it's even fewer days for the Canadian government to make a response to this complaint. So if you're interested in advocacy for accessible housing, you probably are interested in following Roger Gervais. I have certainly learned a lot from Roger, and Roger and I have presented on many occasions about accessible housing because it's one of my passion projects. We also have the New Urban Agenda, which is full of, guess what, accessibility in urban planning and in housing. So again, really good resource if you're trying to help people understand their obligations. This is another one. And then the WHO, the World Health Organization, which we've been hearing about for all the wrong reasons, also has a global age-friendly cities guide that's available to people, and that many cities are now trying to say that they're age-friendly, and many of them are actually sometimes referencing this document, but we find few people are actually following it. So as a resource, if you're looking for something, you can find this available through their website. And again, you can do a screen grab or do a Google search to find it. But if we talk about what is the need for accessibility, because we often get people saying to us as clients, and I'm sure people saying to you, well, how many of them are there? Well, so the Canadian government did a Canadian survey on disability, and this graphic is showing the results from their survey, which was done in 2017, which found that Canadians over the age of 15 reported that having at least one disability at the 22%. Now that was 2017. So if 22% of Canadians had at least one disability, in 2017, that meant there were 6.2 million people in Canada who had some form of disability. So that means, wow, that's a lot of people that you could be welcoming into a business who need to have education, healthcare, housing, services, you name it. And it's not an insignificant number. That's approaching 1 in 4. In fact, in some cases, we have found that it depends on the question you ask. And some people who've done other surveys have found that it's probably closer to 24 or 25% and already at 1 in 4 if you ask a slightly different series of questions. And we have a rapidly aging population, so the number of people who need accommodations is growing dramatically. In Ontario, if we took that 22% and applied it to the 14.32 million people from the 2018 census, that would mean there's 3.15 million people reporting having at least one disability. And just to be fair, because we're dealing all the way across Canada, I thought I'd look at Ottawa. If Ottawa, which had a population in 2017 of 994,000 plus people, if we applied 22% to that, well, first, if we just consider 1%, If it was 1% of people with disabilities, that would be almost 10,000 people. That's 10,000 people who could be at your restaurant, at your bar, at your business. If it was 10%, then you're talking about almost 100,000 people. But at 22%, you're talking at over 218,000 people who could be and need to and have the right to participate in our society. So the need is quite large out there. And then again, looking back at 2017, for the very first time, like many first world countries, Ontarians over the age of 65 was a larger part of our population than those under the age of 14. In fact, we are such a rapidly aging first world population. We have over 1,000 people a day turning 65. So what I like to remind people of is one of the problems with collecting statistics where you ask people, do you have a disability, is that sometimes people won't answer on a form. So this cartoon here shows a woman sitting in a wheelchair, but she sees her shadow on the wall, not as an old lady, but as a young lady dancing. And if you ask people, my bookkeeper included, do you have a disability? My bookkeeper uses 2 canes to get around. But it wasn't until I started talking to her about these presentations, or I guess she had a chance to see my presentation, that she said, you know, Thea, I've never thought of myself as a person with a disability. And yet she can't walk without her canes. So I think the number of people who need accommodations or benefit from accommodations is much larger. In fact, isn't it true that we really all face a lifetime of changing needs and abilities? Perhaps you've heard David Lepofsky from the AODA Alliance speaking about this, that we're all really an illness, accident, or aging away from getting a disability ourselves. So here I show a graphic of the lifespan of a woman, going from a crawling baby infant to a small toddler to a child with a broken arm to a girl, an older girl with pigtails, to an older person with a cast on their foot, to a pregnant lady, to a lady pushing a baby stroller, to a woman holding a briefcase, to a person using a cane, to a person using a walker, to a person using a wheelchair. You know, we could be born with a disability. Let's say we had a mobility disability. As you age, the natural aging process includes what? Vision loss, hearing loss, probably arthritis, maybe dementia. So none of us are in a fixed state. If you think about your own experience, how different were you 20 years ago? And how different do you think your abilities are going to be 20 years from now? So the problem with the way we think about design is that we think about design like it's designed for non-disabled people, and then accessible design like it's icing on the cake, like it's maybe something nice that we should do. But if we thought about the human condition as a lifetime of changing needs and abilities, shouldn't it instead really be, considering our Charter of Rights and our Human Rights Code, shouldn't we be saying design, which is good for everybody, and the only other option is discriminatory design? I think maybe that's the breakthrough idea that we really have to get our heads around to change our education, change our laws, so that we don't, as it says here, design in haste and repent at leisure. So this is where something like universal design comes in. I don't know if you've heard about universal design, but it's a set of principles to try to guide designers of all different types, whether it's policy or information and communication or websites. In this case, we're showing more physical things. There are 7 principles, including equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive use, perceptible information, tolerance for error, low physical effort, and size and space for approach and use. If, as you're designing something, your building code doesn't tell you how to do these things, by using these principles, you can create much more flexible and inclusive design that helps everybody. So what does universal design do? Well, it addresses the anthropometric requirements and needs for women. Did you know that our building code is actually designed for 6-foot tall people with generally perfect vision, hearing, and mobility? The average height for women is 5'4". And you know what's weird? The average height for men is 5'9" or 10, depending on which study you look at. So why are we designing for 6 foot tall people? We also don't think about gender neutral, or maybe we're starting to as we talk about inclusion. We're not designing for seniors. We're not designing for children with disabilities. What about families? If a dad takes a daughter to the baseball game, where does he take his daughter to go to the bathroom if there isn't a gender neutral washroom? And how do we prevent people from using the accessible washrooms as the only family alternative? People with cognitive disabilities or neurodiverse people, people who are short or little people, so people who do not read or speak the language. So if I go to Quebec and I'm in a French part of the country, universal design approach would help me better understand what's happening. And then, of course, far too often we forget about people with environmental sensitivities. So universal design can help us with all of these different requirements. In fact, I love this graphic. This is from Microsoft's design toolkits. And it shows that really universal design, or the idea of a lifetime of changing needs and abilities, can be categorized into 3 different categories as a way to think about helping everyone. The vertical columns here show permanent, temporary, and situational graphics that deal with touch, seeing, hearing, and speaking. So under touch for permanent, we see somebody who's an amputee with one arm or only born with one arm. And then under the temporary column, we see arm injury. So someone with a temporary disability, perhaps like a broken arm or a sprain. And then situational, like a new parent holding a baby. And I love this graphic because it really helps to underline at any time we could be distracted, we could have loud music playing, or someone could be speaking with a heavy accent and not be heard. You could equally be sick with laryngitis, have an ear infection, have a cataract, and have a temporary disability that may last a short time last longer. You could be born deaf or nonverbal or blind. We should be designing for everybody, shouldn't we? And this is another great concept. If people are talking to you about their concerns, one of the things that you might want to talk to them about is something we call life cycle costing. Life cycle costing is something we typically talk about for sustainability, which is important economic analysis. It's used to select alternatives that impact both pending or current costs, as well as the future costs, sometimes also known as future proofing. It compares the initial investment options to the return on the investment and identifies the least cost alternative for a 20-year period. So instead of just thinking, right, I can build it cheaply right now, who cares if I'm going to have to spend $10 million to fix it in 5 years? It considers, if I did it now, it might cost me 1% more, but it would save me a lot of money down the road. So now let's have a quick look at accessible housing, because I want to get you excited about what you can do to help change the situation we have in our building code, but also to know where there are resources in case you're involved with a project. So for example, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation has this great accessible and adaptive housing website that talks about universal design in housing. It talks about secondary suites. It has a whole section on accessible housing by design, so specifically how to do it. It also talks about aging in place and universal design and adaptive housing models. So lots of good information there. When you talk about accessible housing, I want to introduce you to 4 different categories that you might hear about. And sometimes people use them interchangeably. One is accessible housing. That's typically dedicated housing where your occupational therapist perhaps is helping you create a custom home for yourself. Number 2 is visitable housing. And this is the idea that shouldn't everybody in the neighborhood be able to come by and borrow a cup of sugar or have a coffee or come by for a barbecue? If we understand the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, everybody should be able to get your front door, come in, have access to a bathroom, and have access at least to the first floor. Number 3 is adaptable housing. Now this is really smart future-proofing kind of design, where if 100% of us at some point in our lives, through illness, accident, or aging, going to have a disability, shouldn't we make it affordable if we don't build houses to be purpose-built to be accessible? Shouldn't it be affordable to transform them into something that is accessible? Unfortunately, our current designs don't do that at all. And then, of course, number 4, universal design. Universal design and adaptable housing are sometimes a little bit interchangeable, and they sort of share some ideas, but I wanted to make sure you had the vocabulary just in case you were interested going forward. We're also hearing a lot about co-housing, where people with shared experiences, but not necessarily enough money to live on their own, are building a purpose-built, affordable, adaptable, visitable housing and sharing those costs, having companionship, because we know that isolation is another issue for people with disabilities. If you can find accessible housing, but you can't visit anybody, that's pretty isolating. This is a group called Better Living Design. It's an American group, and here they're talking about townhomes as a solution. Now, I have trouble with townhomes because I think there are some real limitations to this. So again, sometimes when people are suggesting things, you have to have a bit of a lens to think, if you look at a typical townhouse, there are probably some stairs involved. So it would have to be a pretty small or pretty different type of design than you would normally see. But one of the things that they also include in the BLD, or Better Living Design, is that the cost of creating a house that has visitable and adaptable design has been charted at, with an experienced team, anywhere from 0 to 5%. And in fact, most of the research I have seen and experienced shows that an experienced design team and an experienced builder can do this for at most 1%. There are some real costs if you're trying to make it accessible, but visitable and adaptable are very affordable options that, as we said before, from a life cycle and future-proofing perspective, probably save us a ton of money down the road. So if we spent 1% more now, we could live in there, in that house that we love, in the neighborhoods we love, live in place for as long as we choose to. Probably a much better investment. And this is a British group that's been working on accessible homes in Britain, and they created a list here of 4 different benefits to creating accessible housing as a part of regular housing stock. 1, it reduces falls, it helps to prevent mental health and isolation issues and other care costs. It's avoidable hospital admissions. It increases it helps to avoid the increase for stays in hospital due to a lack of accessible housing. So imagine if you had an accident and were released to go home, but your house wasn't accessible and wasn't affordable to be adaptable. Unfortunately, we have a situation where people can become homeless, and the wait list for places is difficult. And then number 4 being just one night in the hospital actually costs the National Health Service around £273, while 1 week residential care averages at £550. So how much does it cost to make an accessible home or adaptable homes that people can live in under whatever circumstances actually benefit society? We must have access, remember, when you're trying to look at visitable and adaptable housing, for access to transit, community services, shopping, education, and employment. Equity, choice, and affordability are critical. And then, of course, age in place opportunities. We love our neighborhoods. We love our neighbors. We want to be able to stay where we are. Most of us can't do that because our housing stock doesn't allow it. So I wanted to show you some successful examples. This is a community in Bridgewater, which is just outside Winnipeg, Manitoba. And 50% of this development were actually development purpose-built as visitable and adaptable or age in place friendly housing. And often when people talk about accessibility, they say, oh, it's ugly, oh, it's institutional. And I think you'll agree this is neither of those things. This house that we're looking at with the driveway and the fancy upgrades doesn't have to have fancy upgrades, but you can see that it doesn't have to look bizarre or institutional at all. This is an example of a building that was opened in 2001, so a long time ago now. And this was purpose-built to be adaptable and accessible. You can see that the oven is elevated, the dishwasher is elevated, the counter actually has a height adjustable counter. And what you can't see is that the sink on the far wall also has cupboards that can open and swing out of the way, providing knee space underneath the counter. So they really focused on color contrast, on inclusivity for 100% of the apartments at 6 North Apartments in St. Louis, Missouri. And I've had a chance, this is actually my picture. I was actually there with them. This is a new thing from Daniels Corporation, a local developer. They have an accessible design program where they're now offering, again, as a part of the Ontario Building Code requirement for 15% of apartments to be accessible, they've actually sat down and thought about what that actually means. So they have real examples. It's not something that they're sort of throwing together at the last minute. I haven't yet seen one of these completed, but if I know there are buildings underway that will have these features. So I'm really excited. And I know there are some here in Mississauga as well. So hopefully you'll be seeing these across Canada soon. Successful housing examples also include the world's first fully accessible condominium. So this is a Liberty Hamlets development where they're focusing on, again, 100% of the condominiums will be accessible. So that's going to be opening again in the next couple of years. So really exciting to see. So quickly then we'll focus on accessibility, addressing accessible housing issues. Beyond code minimum accessible housing features, really should be looking at the accessibility of the washrooms, the garden, your trash and recycling, fire safety, areas of refuge, and kitchens at a minimum. And things like dignity and independence can be greatly assisted by just making sure that your toilet has a plug someplace close to it. So what we're showing here is a toilet lift. If you wanted to stay in your home and didn't have money to have full-time care, you could stay at home with independence and dignity if you could perhaps get up and down off the toilet. So this is a great innovation, and all it needed was for someone to remember as a design, not a part of the code, but to remember to put in a plug someplace close. And then trash and recycling. Well, those big bins we have at multi-user residents like condominiums and apartments tend to have those huge bins, which everybody has a hard time getting into. Well, guess what? You can half bury those bins because those trucks can lift those bins themselves. So instead of people having to do the reaching, you can half bury them and easily access your trash and recycling with independence. And then for gardening, well, guess what? We can have raised beds if we remember to make sure that we have an accessible path of travel and knee space. People should have the right to enjoy gardening and grow their own vegetables and smell things and touch things and have access to them. And guess what? We all have bad backs. So having raised planters is good for, again, everybody throughout their lives. Fire safety is a big issue because in the building code, if your building is sprinklered, then you don't have to have fire safety included. You can have fire doors, which most people are not aware of, that are called different zones. But how would you know which exit is accessible and which isn't? Because while our building code does talk about accessible entrances, we don't yet have a requirement for accessible exits. So this is a concept, this image here is showing signage indicating that the exit, the running man exit to the right is an non-accessible exit, but the exit on the left shows both a running man and an active person in a mobility device, in this case probably a wheelchair, with an arrow pointing to an accessible exit on the left. This is not in the building code. It's something you have to ask for in addition, and it totally makes sense. And what does an area of refuge look like? Well, if you can't evacuate the building, right, you get to the elevator and it says, do not use the elevator in case of an emergency. You know, if the fire alarm's been pulled, you can't use the elevator. So all the ambulatory people, the people who can walk, can go down the stairs and have a safe place in a smoke protected, fire protected staircase. But people with mobility disabilities or non-ambulatory people don't have the same protection. So if you just made a small area on the landing so that people could see them and two-way communication, this is information is from RATH signage. So again, you can look up areas of refuge in RATH, R-A-T-H, and you can find all this great information about how to do an area of refuge in a stair or even in an elevator lobby, which is sort of a secondary way to do it because you're not going to have the same sort of smoke protection, but at least it would be someplace people could find you and perhaps evacuate you if there was a fireman's elevator. But kitchens, I mean, people will talk about accessibility has to be ugly, and I think this is a bright yellow kitchen, but it has a height adjustable counter, and it has height adjustable upper cabinets as well as a lower cabinet. So you can get to your worktop, you can get to your sink, and again, multi-generational homes would think about how to make accessibility great for everybody. Here's another example. If you weren't looking at this closely, isn't this a beautiful kitchen? I mean, I don't think I would use those knobs for the doors because that's probably going to be hard for people who start to have mobility issues for their hands or who can't. Generally, you want to have controls that you can operate with a closed fist. But I don't think anybody would look at this and say it's institutional. One of the things I often have my design teams do is take the floor plans they have, take the site plans they have, and connect the dots. Use a highlighter to connect from the closest bus stop to the entrance, from the drop-off to the entrance, from the parking to the entrance. How could somebody with a mobility disability get there? How could somebody with vision loss get there? And then, of course, once they get into the building, the same thing. These are really good strategies, even for yourself, to, when you're reviewing drawings, to give people feedback to look at and ask questions about. So now let's quickly talk about how to give accessibility feedback. Education is the key to success. So for you, if you are involved with an accessibility advisory committee, getting some training around how to read a site plan, looking and getting yourself familiar with your local accessibility standards means when someone says, "What's wrong with this?" you're not just stuck saying, "I'm not sure, but these are the issues that I have," right? You could start quoting better than code minimum standards to help them. And you can also help encourage projects, if you're in a position to do so, to think about when are they going to consult with people with disabilities. If we're going to live the nothing about us without us, we need to be talking to people with disabilities. So when do we consult? Often and as early as possible. Get it into the requirements. You want to talk about the accessibility of the materials that you're using, the furniture, the fixture, the equipment. All of those are going to impact your building or could sabotage your building. And of course, you should be expecting compensation. You shouldn't be volunteering or expected to volunteer your time. It's lovely if you can do so, but if you're offering your lived experience expertise, you should be getting paid. And that's been a trend that we've seen in the last few years. I'm not sure what's going to happen with COVID, but I don't believe that we should be asking people to participate for free. And then acknowledging that it's good for all people with particular need instead of an individual preference. So one of the things that can be problematic is if I'm a blind person using a guide dog, my perspective on the needs of a blind person are going to be different than the perspective of a blind person who uses a white cane. So when you're making decisions about what do people with disabilities of a particular type of disability, you may not be considering your particular preference versus the need of the entire group. So this is why wide consultation is really important. And it also doesn't consider the intersectionality of accessibility, where a person that you might be dealing with, they could be, in an upper middle class situation, they could be white and they could be deaf, for example, or they could be of a different ethnicity, they could be poor, or any combination thereof, or they could have multiple disabilities. So they could be losing their hearing, be hard of hearing like myself, and have mobility issues or arthritis in their shoulders from pushing themselves around in the mobility devices. So I think what we have to be conscious of is what is the right answer. We have to be careful that we're not just pushing our own personal preference, but investigating what other people might need. So then quickly, let's look at some resources. The Public Service and Procurement Canada actually has a really good set of information out there on their website. In fact, they have a YouTube page about inclusive by design and inclusive accessible by default. So wouldn't that be nice if we had all of those things? So again, if you want to do a quick screen grab or take a picture of this so you can get access to it, or you can search Public Services and Procurement Canada, inclusive by design, and you should be able to find this video. So there are some other great resources for the built environment that are free. The AODA, Design of Public Spaces from Ontario, which is, if you're outside of Ontario, is not required by law, but could be good guidance for you. It's not the most progressive, but it does have some great things. And I know when I work on projects outside of Ontario, I miss the AODA. And this is a document that I was actually a co-author in the original document. It was edited by other people, but that was put together by gates.org. That's GAATES.org. And they have an illustrated guide which tells you point form, what's required by law. And then also I got them to agree to include best practices. So where the legislation has gaps, we were able to fill in some of those gaps with some good information. So you'll definitely want to check that out. The Canadian Standards Association, unfortunately, is not free, but it is a standard that's being used by the Rick Hansen Foundation, if you're familiar with their program. It's called B651-18, and it's called Accessible Design for the Built Environment. It's not free, but it is something that can be used optionally in the National Building Code. And the National Building Code is being reconciled with this standard right now. We were hoping it was going to be adopted in full for the National Building Code, but with the changes coming with the Accessible Canada Act, there could be even more coming down the pipeline. So we're not sure, we don't have a clear vision yet, but this is definitely something you should be aware of, even if you don't maybe have a copy of yourself. You should be asking if they're using it for your projects. The Canadian National Institute for the Blind, also known as the CNIB, has a built environment section called Clearing Our Path, which is free and helps better to understand the general needs of people with vision loss or who are blind in the built environment. Very handy. I use that one a lot. And I'm in Mississauga, but throughout Ontario, we have municipalities with phenomenal, very progressive, universally design-based standards, sometimes called facility accessibility design standards, sometimes just accessibility design standards. You'll want to have a look at these. This city of Mississauga and many of the Ontario municipalities make their available for free. The city of Mississauga has a full HTML version, which makes it very accessible. And again, it's full of diagrams as well as both why you need to do it, how you need to do it, and what specifically the technical requirements. So very handy. The city of Ottawa also has an accessibility design standards, and I picked it out in addition to Mississauga because it's the only one that I know in Ontario that actually includes some things about visitable housing. It doesn't have a lot of detail in it, but it's the only one that I know of in Ontario that includes this. BC has some very progressive stuff about visitable design, especially in Saanich. And then there's also under Gates an information and communication technology publication, which talks about how to do accessible meetings, how to provide accessible feedback, how to do accessible websites. So again, if you want to take a screen grab of these resources, this will probably help you post this presentation, and hopefully will give you at least some really good starting points for your own accessibility adventures and advocacy. So when we think about who are we designing for, isn't it the rookie mistake? Couldn't you just imagine a first-year student, a 19, 20-year-old designing only for able-bodied people or non-disabled people? That's the mistake we're seeing our society make over and over again when we really have a lifetime of changing needs and abilities. Okay, so that takes us to questions. I know we're a little bit late here, but hopefully you've enjoyed that. I know I've enjoyed giving it to you, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Thea, very much. I have seen you so many times, and I can't believe I keep on learning something new. So thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Has anybody got any questions?
Okay, we got Ashton Nicola Forbes. You have a question?
I just go by Ashton. My question is, I know at the University of Western, there's a lot of renovations and new buildings being built. However, what usually comes up is when it comes to redesigning those places for accessibility, it's usually the budget is too small and all these other factors. But isn't there some sort of bar that once you do put so much into renovations, you got to build in accessibility at that point?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. So basically the perpetual problem we see at universities, colleges, and most projects, and again, I talk about this in my TEDx talk, and I have the article of that published on LinkedIn, so if you want to read more. Nice to talk to you, Ashton. I see you online all the time. And thank you for forwarding the resources to the universities. So the question was about perpetually the problem is there doesn't seem to be enough budget or enough space in any of these projects to really affect real change, to learn from the mistakes of previous buildings that weren't very accessible or the audits that are done of existing infrastructure. So why is that happening? Well, there are two things. One, the AODA does say significant renovations are required to follow the AODA requirements or standards. But as I mentioned before, the only thing around the AODA that relates to the built environment is the design of public spaces. And unfortunately, one, the name says it's not about staff, but two, it's exterior mostly. 95% of that standard is about exterior requirements. So parking, sidewalks, stairs, ramps, anything outside, except a couple places where the building code has some specific requirements. And then the only things inside the building that the design of public spaces includes is service counters, fixed queuing areas, and waiting areas with fixed furniture. So the other problem we have is the Ontario Building Code, like the National Building Code, has a Part 11, which helps to govern what happens under renovations. And unfortunately, some developers are pretty good at finding loopholes in Part 11 that exempt accessibility. So from a legislative standpoint, we don't really have anything pushing us to improve accessibility in the building code or in the AODA. So we have the loopholes in the building code, 3.8 in the building code if you're dealing with a large commercial thing like a university or college or a municipal building, for example, would have to meet the accessibility requirements. But again, as I mentioned, Part 11 can undo some of those requirements. So you have to be vigilant. If you're writing an RFP or request for proposal for a new building, you might want to say accessibility shall not be exempt by Part 11 of the Ontario Building Code or the National Building Code, right? You have to be very specific in your language. And what I talked about in my TEDx talk is what we see at, again, this is heartbreaking at universities and colleges, is that they don't do the pre-design work. They don't take the information they learned to make sure that the information they're giving the design team has the space for the furniture that's accessible, that has the equipment that's accessible, that has the fixtures that are accessible. They haven't made sure that their feasibility study has included the budget for accessibility. So for example, at a university, you might want to make it fully accessible, power door operators at every classroom. Well, that's going to be a cost. The power door operators can cost anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000, depending on the type that you pick. And if you multiply that by how many classrooms you have and hadn't included that in the budget of the project, you can see where by the time the architect gets the project, they're between a rock and a hard place. You have a preset budget and they're being asked to include accessibility that there's no budget for. If they've been auditing their existing buildings and the classrooms are too small for accessibility, but the university hasn't gone and changed the minimum size for a classroom, and then tells the architect, you have this much square footage, or you have to build on this site, and you have to fit in this many classrooms in the building. When the architect tries to make those classrooms larger for accessibility, they can't fit the number of classrooms required by the project into that footprint. So the universities and colleges, and I'm not just saying like this is hospitals, all kinds of things, it's called functional programming, where they set up the actual space that you need to create the rooms. And that means looking at the furniture, looking at the equipment, looking at the path of travel. If they haven't been updated to include accessibility, by the time the architects are hired to do the project, you're even if you hire, designable environments to be the accessibility specialists, there's not much I can do because we don't have the budget and we don't have the space. So, that's one of the things that I keep trying to push for is pre-design work has to be done. Otherwise, we're not going to see differences. And sometimes the facilities, to be honest, the facilities department can be some of the people who really have it firmly implanted in their mind that the building code, and for example, in Ontario, the AODA, are already asking them to do enough. So they could be quite resistant, or you might hear people saying that's not very realistic, or we have to be realistic. And often I try to talk about life cycle costing when I run into that. How much is it going to cost for us to build it right now? Maybe 1% more. How much is it going to cost for us to fix later? Research has shown fixing it later can cost 22% more than doing it right in the first place. So having those kind of stats and challenging people to think about, do you really want to build something that you could have a human rights complaint made against you for building now? Or do you want to spend a little bit of extra time and effort if you can? And shouldn't we be doing pre-planning to make sure that no public money, certainly, or nothing in our facility or in our business is being built to exclude people?
Thank you. The next question is coming from Steve. Steve, you have a question?
Hi, Thea, how are you today? Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I had a question. Can you go back to the slide, the refuge area, when there's an emergency?
Yeah, I was thinking about you as we were doing that.
Yes. Yes. And when I saw the picture, hold on. Yeah, that area of refuge, I knew you were going to think of me because I saw what's missing. And that's what we're trying to really implement to have accessibility for anybody who's mobility impaired. There you go.
So I think what you're saying.
So my question was, we see the firemen. Yeah. Where, an evacuation chair would be essential in a design, because the firemen's responsibility is not to save people, to turn off the fire first.
Right.
And then after, obviously, look for people to save. We've had a lot of talks actually in BC. We're doing about 14 buildings now, because they see the essential need of having evacuation chairs. So it would be an idea. I'm actually being part of the government. They're actually going, I can send you the link. They actually have a talk on the 25th, Help Shape Canada's Accessibility Standards. I'm not sure if you're going to join that one.
Yes, I will be.
Oh, perfect. Excellent. Yeah, it was just a thought of mine, because I know I see everybody there. I see a gentleman in a wheelchair. Maybe there's a pregnant woman. How do they get down quickly and efficiently?
Right. The reason I don't talk about evacuation chairs, because evacuation chairs can be great, particularly in a retrofit situation where there simply isn't the space to do this, or there are other limitations. But the feedback we've received from the accessibility advisory committees, particularly for people with mobility assisted devices, is the thought of leaving their device behind has been problematic for them.
Like a wheelchair,
if they
or a device
have
that they may have,
they could have a custom wheelchair that can cost $25,000 or more, and this is their legs, this is their life, this is something that could be irreplaceable. So the idea of them, and then the trust factor, I think, like maybe as evacuation chairs become more popular or people become more familiar with them, but the idea of trusting yourself in a chair with somebody else. And then for people who are quadriplegics, the idea of, you can't transfer or you could be hurt during the transfer are some of the issues we've heard. So I don't think that any of those things are necessarily things that couldn't be overcome, but those are some of the concerns we've heard from the disabled community. And why my preference would be areas of refuge first.
Exactly, areas of refuge. No, but I wanted to share that. Excellent feedback. Thank you.
Can I just interject? We have considered evacuation chairs. I sit at the City of Mississauga Accessibility Design Committee, and what we've looked at is we do have evacuation chairs in, I know in City Hall, and I believe in our library. And
That's
we've
correct.
been looking at having them maybe even in some of our community centers. The thing is that I believe that only firemen should fire people. Should use them because there is that fear of a lay person could use it and hurt somebody.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
when those concerns came up, that's where it was decided that only, fire safety people should actually be the ones using the evacuation chairs.
Excellent. Yeah, that's why we always offer hands-on training. They look complicated, but the ease of use is incredible. That's how they were made, right?
I was going to say, I've seen demonstrations. They
they're-
look very easy to
so-
use.
Yeah, they're so easy to use. A small female or a small male can bring down a 400-pound man with ease. I know people might think of the liability, but again, it's either someone passes away because they weren't evacuated and get a lawsuit of millions of dollars, or a very cheap chair and have it there to save lives, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, but the concern was you hurting somebody.
Yeah.
So I remember when we first discussed it, I think, oh gosh, we started discussing those about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe a bit longer. And I was one of the ones saying, I ain't leaving a building and leaving somebody behind.
Exactly.
One of our other members turns and he goes, you'd be hurting me and yourself. Don't forget you had a stroke. And yeah, you can wave around your left arm, but you have no strength. So you might be hurting both of us. So yeah, you cannot. Operating it down the stairs, that's easy. Getting the person out of their wheelchair into the evacuation chair, not hurting them and not hurting yourself, that's where the concern came.
That's where it came from. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much for asking the question about evac chairs, because it is an option. And as we've heard, there are some concerns. But as you said, sometimes it's better to have nothing. Something.
The way we're looking at it now, we've spoken to quite a few firemen too. Defibrillators, right? Everyone, when they first came out, were terrified to touch them because you're going to get electrocuted,
right.
And maybe hurt somebody. It's the exact same scenario with chairs, but now those are located absolutely everywhere. So we think the evacuation chairs eventually will take the same kind of flow. People will see the necessity to have them. As you say, everything's becoming more accessible for mobility impaired, and people need a way out, an emergency. Today we have so many emergencies, it's incredible. With disasters left, right, center, we need to be able to have.
We need to not leave people behind. That's a very important point. Absolutely. Do we have time for one more question?
I'm just going to interject. Ali has put in the chat. One of the trainers I was with at the RH, which is the Rick Hansen Foundation, always said, why pay more money to build a mistake?
Yeah, that was my point as well. Exactly. Why build something that's not accessible? That's sort of the conversation about having in terms of the life cycle cost. How much does it cost to build now correctly, inclusively, versus having to go back later? And especially, I like to make this point that, and again, if you follow me on social media, I say this all the time, there's nothing more accessible or sustainable than accessibility. If you're interested in sustainability, you don't want to be building something wrong and then having to come back and rip it out if there's space and budget to try to make it accessible. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why accessibility maybe has this bad reputation, is that so often we are dealing with buildings that were built, I guess, before people with disabilities existed or something, or certainly before our building code was changed, and we're trying to retrofit accessibility. And retrofit accessibility, as I said, much research shows that it can be at least 22 times more expensive to fix a mistake than it is to build it right in the first place. So building it right in the first place may cost an additional 1%, But 1% more than what? 1% more than inaccessible discriminatory design. And I think that's the reason, another reason we're not seeing the change is that we're not calling it what it is. If it's not accessible, it's discriminatory. So why are we allowed to get away with that? And I think the answer is we shouldn't be. And it's important that we stop thinking about it in the wrong way.
Totally agree. And that's why we have wonderful people like you out there trying to make this change. But there's more problems out there than there are people like you, Thea. So,
well, that's why I do these talks, because I want to empower every person who's interested in trying to make a change, people with disabilities, people who have loved ones with disabilities, people who recognize they are future people with disabilities. If 100% of us need these accommodations, we need everybody to make sure that they understand what the laws are, understand what our rights are, and understand what the options and resources. It's not a daunting task. We know what needs to be done. We've known for 40 years, and we've had really good standards and resources for the last 20. So there's really no excuse not to be making buildings accessible, not to be doing accessibility and pre-design, not to be thinking about design as being good design for everybody. So I just want to thank everybody for taking the time for coming tonight. I hope you got some really good resources and some really good information that's going to help you feel more confident going forward. And then, of course, please follow me on social media at Thea Kurdi on Twitter, or look me up on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to connect with you. And as I said, I'm constantly posting resources or further resources as I find them, and announcements of great things. And then if you can tune into AMI Radio on Monday, I'll be with Dave Brown on the Now Show, doing a monthly segment on built environment accessibility in the morning. So I'll be posting more details about that as that becomes clear to me too.
What day in the week do you do that?
It's going to be one Monday a month. So the first one is going to be Monday, September the 14th.
Okay. At what time?
I'm going to be publishing that. I think it's sometime around 10 o'clock, but it's 10 minutes. Yeah. So I'm going to try to make sure you know when I know when that's going to be, so you don't miss it. And it's going to be on both AMI Radio as well as AMI TV.
Perfect. Your presentation was incredible. Thank you for all the info. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
If you want to check AMI, it's ami.ca.
Thank you as well.
The website, ami.ca.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you. Oh, I just wanted to say thank you very much. The presentation was very enjoyable. Oh. And I'm going to definitely get in touch with you, Thea, on the different social media that you're on. I saw you were on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Excellent. I look forward to connecting with everybody there.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thea.
Thank you.
And we do have Thea's information on our website. And Thea and I are great friends. On social media, of course, I'm always retweeting what she's doing because she gives such great advice and she's so current. And Amy says, great presentation tonight. Sorry, got to go right now.
Yes, we went over time. I'm sorry. I appreciate you guys taking time.
8:27. We're not over time.
Oh, okay, good. Good.
We actually did really good time. And Ellie put it in there at Thea Kurdi. Followed. So now it's following you.
All right.
Terrific stuff.
And I don't think there's anything else in the chat. Thank you so much again, Thea. Thea, I want to know more about that lanyard. So please,
yeah, I've posted about it a couple of times, but again, I'll post it again. It's something I actually had to buy from England, and you can't buy them individually. I had to buy a pack of 10 and get it shipped over. But I think it's such a great way to do invisible disabilities as a way for dignity and respect without having to. And I know, like, even for myself as a person who's hard of hearing, I have a really hard time in airports. And when
Oh,
I go to
my.
try to catch a flight, they have these screens everywhere, but they don't have the voice to text. So all I hear is, like Charlie Brown. I don't know what that means. Is that my flight's late or my flight's early or they're looking for me? I don't know what's happening. And so I'll often go to the gate and then I have to walk to the front and self-identify. And then they tell me to please sit over here. So I have to sit close to them, which isn't bad. But then often, you know how the staff changes when the airline comes in?
Yeah.
And then they don't tell each other that I'm there and that I need to, so then I have to get up and I have to do it again. And then even still, they get busy and distracted and then can forget again. So it's not a lot of help.
I understand also because I'm hearing impaired both ears. And it happened when I went back to Toronto, to Ontario a year ago. I got put in the spot and then they changed and I almost missed my connection flight.
Oh, my.
I was like, sort of, yeah.
Invisible disabilities. I get told all the time, don't know why you're involved with disability or accessibility. You're able-bodied. I'm like, I can't put a banner with my disability. I have 23 disabilities. And unfortunately, some you can see, maybe you can hear sometimes with my voice, but majority of mine are invisible.
I have a
And then
learning disability that wasn't diagnosed until the very last year of high school because I was very bright. And they couldn't quite reconcile in the 70s and 80s that a person who was smart could have learning disabilities. And so it took them a long time to figure out that I have a form of dyslexia and that I needed glasses. So I was, and I had hearing loss. So they were. I kept thinking like there's something wrong with me. People kept saying like you're not trying hard enough. I had always got A+ until towards the end of high school I started to struggle, and then it became my fault. I was doing something wrong, and so finally to get diagnosed was a bit of a relief. But again, at the time, disability was something that was framed as if you were broken. So that idea that I was doing something wrong, I wasn't doing something wrong, I was wrong. And it took me like 10 years to really process that. And when I went back to college, to Sheridan College, I screwed up my courage and I thought, I'm not going to let this beat me. I'm going to use the resources. So I went to the accessibility office and they gave me my accommodation papers. And I remember had to go to each of my professors and hand them the document and have the conversation. Yeah. And one of my professors, because this takes a couple of weeks, one of my professors threw the paper back at me and said, "You're one of the smartest people in my class. You don't have a learning disability." And I threw it like right now. I'm an extrovert, right? So I discover what I'm thinking by talking. So I threw it back at him, and I said, "It doesn't say that I'm stupid. It says I learn differently." And in that moment, I thought, "That's right." Like I had been shy and scared and worried about education because I had a disability, and when I just realized I just do things differently than, the average. Yeah. So I think like that's one of the most progressive things I've seen happen in accessibility and disability is not thinking about people being broken, but that people are different and wrong. Like it's weird how sometimes in our society we talk about different as being wrong, and that's not, those words are different things, right? Like different simply means difference. And if you thought about the continuum of change and like even just the way somebody thinks or organizes things or processes things, it's not wrong to do it in one way. It's not your way of doing it. So inclusive design, and people are talking so much about inclusivity and diversity now, but they don't think about accessibility when they talk about that. And if you thought about just allowing people to, and again, that's why I love the universal design principles, right? It's simple and intuitive use, allowing for error, it's not about judging. There's only one way to do it. We're not just designing for 6 foot tall people.
Yeah.
The average doesn't, there is no people. We're designing kitchens for no average woman in Canada. Like everybody's upper cabinets is a mystery, right? Like that is ridiculous. Like if you were just starting today, would we do that? No. So the legacy that we've, have has really hurt us. But the empowering thing is that one, we communicate, we do great events like this and share information, but two, that we're getting over this idea of perfect. Exactly. It's that people change and that's okay. And sometimes it's temporary and sometimes it's permanent and that's okay. And we can accommodate them. So I think it's
empowering. This is why I keep going, because I have a learning disability, but last year just graduated with my master's. And my paper was on accessibility and accommodations for students with diverse disabilities.
Right.
I really wanted to, that's why when I saw this, I thought, oh, I'm going to definitely join in on this. A lot of the stuff you talked about, I know some of it was different, but I did quote in my paper a lot about the Ontario disabilities because I covered a lot of papers and included in my dissertation. So
that's terrific. Very exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Well, this is it. Look, when we think about, like you said, heights, my grandma was 5'2", and my grandpa was 6'7.5".
That's like my grandparents.
So they never had a house that was normal, because if it was too high for her, something's, people who are very tall, and I have some tall men in my family, they end up with back issues as they're older.
Yeah.
Because things are not built, even doorways, for people who are over 6'5". Their whole life, they're bent down.
Yeah.
Go on transit, go on the subway. See people who come in, even on the new accessible subways, and they have to do this. Well, by the time those people are in their 40s, they've got dislocated spine, they've got hunchback, they've got nerve damage. And people don't think about that.
Mm-hmm. We actually worked on the Air Canada Center. I don't know, where we have the basketball players in Toronto.
Oh.
And if you get a chance to go for a tour of the building, we use the universal design principles to create the locker rooms for people who have an average height of close to 7 feet. So like as a person who's 5'4", the average for women, I feel like I'm in Lilliput land, like
hey,
the chairs are all
my
huge,
world.
the yeah, exactly, right? The switches are all like way up here, like but it's designed to, but what also really cool is if you go into the locker room, the acoustics, which is not something we often deal with for accessibility. It's like one of the things that we're just starting to try to deal with. In the locker room, there's a sweet spot where the coach can stand and speak in a very normal, quiet voice, and you can hear it in every corner of the room because the ceiling has been tuned to allow for that. So if you thought of all of the different situations where we're not using acoustics to help better navigate or control sound or help presenters or teachers at the front of the room, like that's a whole other area. Like the number of things we could be doing and we know we could be doing that we're not yet in anything, I think it's simultaneously frustrating but also really exciting because it's like I can't wait to get there.
Yeah, it's always more, there's
well, I think in some cases it's not, it's like an open secret, right? Like if we have the City of Mississauga fads or the City of London fads, which have been around for 20 years, when people say to me, well, what do we have to do for accessibility? I'm like, we got a document. It's almost like the willingness to adopt accessibility is the thing that changes, not necessarily what we know we need to do. Yes, there's new technology and there are new things that come along. That's a natural part. But in terms of what we know we should be doing and what we've allowed to happen, the allowed to happen is the moving goalpost more than the do we know what we need to do.
Yeah.
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 Well, I've enjoyed this. I have to go, and I really am going to keep in touch with you, Thea.
Yay!
All right.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for
thanks for
joining
watching
in.
today.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Good night. Thank you again, Thea, so much.
Oh,
Really,
this was
really
a blast.
enjoyed.
Thank you so much. I'm excited. And I hope the recording turned out.
Yes.
Bye.